Monica, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, tell me about books in your early life. Were they something you were instantly drawn to or not so much?
This is a really good question. Yes and no. I was very into, I don't, I was a very strange child, I think. I liked reading as a young kid, but I feel like I was undiagnosed ADHD when I was young. I wasn't diagnosed till I was an adult, but I definitely had some some education that I needed for maturing. Um, I read it's always funny. I think about how my dad like knew I liked to read. My dad never read anything. Like he didn't understand books. And so he would take me to the bookstore and like try to help me find books. And he would like show me books for adults. And like never understood how to show me books for people my age. And so I would try to read these like classics for adults and I would be like, this is not really vibing with me. Eventually I started reading more kids' books, and that's how I fell in love with books. But it was kind of a slow burn. I was a reader, but I wasn't like reading every second of the day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
And so you ended up doing an undergrad in English literature, didn't you? So at
I
some
did.
point, it seems like books really came to the fore. When
Yes.
did that happen?
Yeah, I think probably in high school. High school, and then honestly when I was in college, I started realizing how much I enjoyed reading, and I wanted to spend most of my time doing that ultimately. Which I think a lot of readers could probably say, like, they just wish they could spend their whole day reading, but like, there's no actual, well, there is jobs for that, but whatever. I, yeah, I study English lit, though it's funny, I always laugh at myself. I wish I studied creative writing instead of just literature, because I would have actually had more experience with the craft of actually writing. I like to say that my literature degree just made me a perfectionist and made it harder to write books. But, I did do it because I loved it. That said, I also had wanted to study psychology when I was young. I wanted to do both and I didn't know how to do both. And so I did both in the sense that I have a social work background as well, but I wasn't like trained necessarily.
You mentioned interest in psychology, and then you also mentioned going through a big chunk of your life with undiagnosed ADHD. Do you
Yeah.
feel like that interest in that aspect of academia was coming from your own desire to kind of figure out what was going on with your learning styles?
That's a really good question. I've asked myself a few times why I'm so fascinated by psychology. And I just think I'm fascinated by humans in
Mm.
general. I just think they're interesting. And I have always been curious what makes humans tick, like what's going on in the brain. I'm really fascinated with neuroscience. And yeah, I wish, I don't, I mean, part of it might have been that I was curious about my own brain. But I think I'm also like honestly just very curious about all types of brains and how they work.
I think
So,
I think that plays perfectly into being a writing coach and a writer and a reader. Books and stories are really about people, and whether they're
mhm.
people in the past or people in the future or people on a date. At the end of the day, it's all people. It's all
Yep.
psychology. Though I did go to a sci-fi conference where there was like a hard sci-fi panel, and they were like, "So my book is about two particles in a distant galaxy, and their enzymes interact." I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess not everything's about people, but for the
Fascinating.
most part,
Yes.
that's what we're doing here. We're looking at people, we're exploring people, and we're seeing how they react in different
Yep.
situations, whether that's heroically or tragically or comically, right?
Yeah, I love that because I think that's why my favorite thing about literature is character, ultimately. Like I just love character development.
And so, how did you get into the coaching side of things?
It's a very good question as well. So, I had a master's in publishing, and after I got my master's, this was in 2019, so you can probably imagine what was about to happen.
Interesting
I
times.
I moved to New York to get a job in publishing. I eventually did get a job in publishing, and I couldn't stand living in New York. I didn't want to live there, especially during COVID. It just was not the vibe. And I also think I really struggle with a very typical type of job. The typical like you have to get there at a certain time, and you have to be there for a certain time, and you have to be productive for these certain times. It wasn't how my brain worked. And so when I left the job and we left New York, I kind of questioned what I would do. I thought about becoming an agent for a bit. And then I was like, no, I don't read fast enough to be an agent ultimately. Like you have to read really fast to be an agent. Like truthfully, you do. And so when I was working at an agency for a minute. I eventually decided I don't want to do agenting. And I kind of just stumbled into coaching. The person that worked with me and diagnosed me with ADHD said most people with ADHD prefer to own their own businesses and to be self-employed. And I was like, okay, sure, I'll try that. And I just kind of went with it. And that's kind of how everything was born. I mean, it took me a minute to build everything, but that's kind of where it came from, was this desire to help people, in the psychology background, but also knowing books and knowing publishing and knowing writing really well.
You and I are in a bit of a writing coach mastermind together, but have you ever been in any kind of business groups with other entrepreneurs specifically?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
they're all ADHD. They're all like, I started 17 businesses, 15 of them failed. The last
Yep.
two finally came together, and
Yeah.
constantly new idea, new idea, new
Yep.
idea. Yeah. So I can, well, I mean, let's dig into that for a minute because because you are open about your own ADHD, you draw a lot of neurodivergent
Yep.
writers to you for your coaching, right? And I'm
Yep.
curious, I think maybe the average initial instinct would be like, oh, wow, that must be so hard. But I'm actually curious, what are the benefits that neurodivergent writers bring to the writing process? And how does the fact that they see the world in a different way or have different energy actually help their creative process?
Yeah. I think it depends so much on the individual and how their brain is wired. But for me, I can speak to my own personal experience here. My my ADHD allows me to have a certain level of risk taking. I have a very high tolerance for risk taking. I mean, I wouldn't have started a business if I didn't. I wouldn't have moved across the world if I didn't have a high tolerance for risk. And people are like, "Oh, you're still brave." And I'm like, "I honestly, can I cuss here or do I need to like keep it
No
clean?"
cuts away because I actually like getting in there in the editing and going beep, beep.
Love it.
I'm not offended by cursing whatsoever. I just
I love
actually
it.
like the process of censoring for some
That's
reason.
so funny. So when people are like, "Oh, you're so brave," I'm like, I honestly just don't fucking think things through. Like I
Yeah.
just like go for shit. I just like I'm just like, "Oh, I'll just do this thing." And I don't really think about the consequences at all. And in some ways, I mean, sometimes I'll think about the consequences. If I'm trying to be really strategic in my business, yes, I'll think about the pros and cons. But often my best ideas just come from me being like, "Oh, I got this idea, I'll just do it." And I have, a focus group now in my business to help me run ideas off to get their opinions and things like that, which is really helpful. But I think we think on our feet very well, and we know how to go with what our brains want. I don't overthink a lot. I can sometimes overthink, but I don't, that's not my natural kind of inclination. I also think that because we typically have this like divergent thinking, that we have, I don't know, almost the ability to not worry as much about what maybe the industry is saying, but what we think would be interesting. And that can also often just like make stuff that people find really interesting because it's not, what would they call it, saturated. I don't love that term personally, but I think there's just a lot of benefits. My husband is always like, you're just so ADHD. Like you just go for stuff. You just have all these ideas and you just do it. And I'm like, I don't even know I'm doing that. It's very natural.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of benefits to not overthinking things and moving forward, especially with a small business, right? Where it's like sometimes I'll be working with clients, they'll be like, how do you choose like who should pick your cover, like your cover designer? There's so many out there. And so at one point I was like needed a cover, so I went on to Readsy and like recorded my thought process, and I was like, this one has blue hair. I like people with blue hair. Click. Like this one is in Toronto. I live near Toronto. And like that's the extent of my thought
Yeah.
process. Like at some point you kind of have to have faith that your gut instinct is right. Or at some point you just have to make a choice and move forward,
Yep.
and see how the dice roll. Is that a saying?
Yeah.
It's
It's
something.
funny because my husband is very, if you know about the Enneagram, I'm very into
Mm.
the Enneagram and he's very five. He like researches so much before he takes action. I'm not like that at all. I'll research a little, I'll do some research, but then I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go for it. Like, it's almost like the fuck around, find out. If you've seen that graph on Instagram,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's so silly. But yeah, that's kind of how I live my life, I guess.
Well, so there's something interesting going on here in terms of, you come from this science background to some extent, but then you also clearly kind of trust your gut. And I think you've
Mm,
described your work as soul rooted and whatnot.
mm,
So, what does the merging of these two sides of your personality look like when it comes to working with authors?
yeah. This is a fascinating question that I was actually just thinking about today. I have a lot, like so many neurodiverse clients who cannot stand story structure. And for the last few years, I've been wondering, like, why is it that so many of my neurodiverse clients hate story structure? And like, I also don't, I mean, I think story structure is great for the people who like it. I don't think it's something we should just throw and toss away. I think it's great for people who help or get help from it. But I get a lot of people saying, I just can't wrap my head around it. I learned all these, like, I read all these craft books, I did all this stuff, and now I'm stuck. And it's funny, I think when you think about the human condition, like we're all very different, right? We're all the same, but we're all different. And I think with part of me, I want to know why humans are the way they are. So I am fascinated by science and I'm fascinated by how the brain works. But then part of me also says, like, yeah, everybody has a different process and creativity is very personal. Reading is personal, for example, creativity is the same. And so we all have to find what works for us. And a lot of the people who I work with tend to be newbie writers who maybe they've written a book, maybe they've written one or two books, but typically they're relatively new to the process and they haven't really practiced a lot. And so they've maybe read a bunch of craft books and they're like, well, I'm trying to do what this craft book told me and it's not working. And I'm like, well, maybe this craft book just isn't like, maybe just take a few things from it, don't take the whole thing from it. And I have a theory. I don't know if this is a correct theory. I could be totally wrong. But I have a theory that a lot of neurodiverse people have PDA, pathological demand avoidance,
Mm.
and they really struggle to follow rules. And
Hmm.
I think that's one of the reasons that so much structure can stop them from writing. I know a lot of, like, for example, autistic people will often say like they have really severe PDA with like they don't like being told what to do, which a lot of people don't like being told what to do. Like, let's be real. Um, but I think for some neurospicy people, it can be severe, like more severe than a typical person. And so when you tell them like, oh yeah, like follow these beats, they're like there's even if they're not consciously aware that they're like, I don't like this, there's something that stops them from wanting to do it, which I find fascinating. I don't know why. I don't know why this is. I love to do brain scans and understand why this is, but a lot of times this need for, oh, I'm into the brain science. Like this is the need for like, the math part of me, the part that's like I want answers, I want exacts. But then there's this neurospicy side of me that's like that's not like realistic for all humans, right? And I think that's kind of where they can join.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. It's so interesting. Like I feel like you and I have the same job and we serve like completely different audiences in completely different ways. Because I'm like, okay, you want to work with me? Step one, I need you to get a story structure tattoo. Okay, we were gonna want that on your arm 24/7, you know. So and it's interesting too, because when you say like I think most people don't want to be told what to do, I find that's that sense from you is probably from the group that you work with. Because
Hmm.
what I find, even if they don't admit it to themselves, is so many people just want to be told what to do. They're like,
Yeah.
I'm struggling, it's hard. Just tell me the A, B's, and C's to get this thing done, right? And so,
Yeah.
like you said, so many different types of people out there, and some people just like can't like handle being told A, B, C. They're like, I don't
Yeah.
work that way. And
I don't
other
work
people
that
are
way. Yeah.
like, just give me A, B, C. That's all I want,
Yeah.
right? Which is great because then, there's people like you and there's people like me and there's a million other coaches and we're all there to serve our audiences and able to give them what they need.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. One of my clients recently was like, well, why does story structure make me feel like I'm being put in a prison? And I was like, babe, I wish I could tell you why our ADHD exists and what's going on the inside, but like you just have to let it tell you what it wants and follow your intuition. And
Mhm.
a lot of times I think when people are newbies, if you've, you know, read a lot of craft books, but you haven't practiced a lot, you haven't really figured out what works for you. You have to give yourself practice to know what works and what doesn't work. You have to iterate your process, right?
I think that's what you were getting to a couple moments ago. And it got, I always use this metaphor. I'm Canadian, so I have to use hockey metaphors, right? And I'm like, you could sit in the stands and read 20 books about hockey. You could know how to
Yep.
set up the perfect power play. You could know every single thing there is about hockey. None of that's going to matter when you put on skates and actually
Nope.
get onto the ice for the first time, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, you got to study your sport or your art or whatever, but you also just have to put in the reps, right? You just
Yep.
need to put those skates on and go skating day after day after day, year after year after year, right? And
Yep.
and I think that's a lot of what you're talking about here, right? It's with the people you're working with, a lot of the time you're like, get the reps in, keep moving forward, right?
Yep, exactly. Because you won't know unless you put the reps in. Like you literally just won't know what works and what doesn't work for your brain.
Oh, for
And we
sure.
don't have a manual for our own brains, right? We wish we did. We have manuals for our computers, but there's no manual for how your brain works.
Well, because you work with neurodivergent writers a lot of the time, but actually, let's not even focus on them. Let's focus on anyone who comes to you dealing with resistance or
Mm,
procrastination, self doubt, avoidance, all of these sorts of things. What's your diagnostic approach in terms of kind of saying, okay, with this particular writer in this particular situation, what's the thing holding them up?
yeah. I usually ask a lot of clarifying questions, and I have to get to the root of, well, there could be many roots. There could be a lot of different things kind of combined. But it requires me kind of doing like a deep dive into their psyche, honestly, which sounds kind of scary. But there's questions like asking them what happens when they sit down to write. What is their body telling them? What is their brain telling them? What are the thoughts going on? Are there even thoughts? Is it just panic? Is it just freeze? Like, what exactly are you experiencing? Do you even sit down to write? When you try to sit down to write, what's going on? There's a lot of me trying to figure out what their body is pointing them to do when they're trying to write. And then I can kind of diagnose from there, which obviously I'm not a psychiatrist, but I can imagine the brain science of, oh, I sit down to write, and I start sweating and I get clammy and then I walk away because I feel like I can't do it, for example. And I'm like, yeah, you're going to fight or flight. Well, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And usually, as much as writing is personal, the body is not always personal, right? If somebody's going into fight or flight, there are things we can do, nervous system wise or cognitively, to help them overcome it. And that usually means very boring things, such as showing up to write for 5 minutes and building a habit right building what I call writing neurons, so like creative neurons showing up consistently. But you have to build the neurons in order to get the neurons, which means you have to show up on a generally regular basis. Doesn't have to be every day. But it's all kind of feels boring when you like map it out and you're like, oh, that's what it takes. Like it's kind of like when you want to go to the gym and you're like, it requires putting on your running shoes and going to the gym. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It feels
absolutely.
very boring saying it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's the same with weight loss, right? It's like I want to lose weight and get in shape and feel great. And it's like the secret is exercise more, not even exercise, move more and eat healthier, right? It's like
Yep.
we all know that, but just because it's boring and we all know it doesn't mean it's easy to
Yep.
execute on, right? Which is
Yeah.
why folks like you and I exist, because some of these things, even though they appear boring and simple, are so difficult to do that they need
Hmm.
support along the way.
Yep. It's almost impossible for a lot of people to do these things because most of us don't know. I mean, maybe we know about, yes, if I want to feel better, I exercise. But a lot of people don't realize that when they're dealing with resistance with writing, that it's really just a brain science thing. It's just the way their brains are wired. They're like, oh, I just not cut out for this. Like, I'm just not meant to be a writer. I'm like, no, it's just your brain protecting you. That's what it's designed to do. Sorry.
Totally. I always use the lion example. Like I took my family to a lion safari, and we were all so excited to see the lions as we get to, it's like, the grocery store, they put the milk at the back, so you have to walk through the whole store to get,
Yeah.
it's like they do that with the lions, right? So we finally get to the lions, and it's like this bright sunny day, and there's this giant rock, and the lion is just like dead asleep on it. And it's like, he's not moving. He's definitely not roaring or eating anybody. And my kids are like, is he gonna do something? And I was like, I don't think so, honey. And whenever I'm feeling like resistance or lazy or something, I'm like, no, no, no. Like, we are the lion. Like, in nature, if we have an opportunity to lay on a rock and enjoy the
Yep.
sun, we do. We
Hmm.
preserve that energy, right? We're like
Yep.
biologically conditioned not to work like insane amounts. And so it really does take systems and
Yep.
practices to kind of get into that rhythm.
It does. And I think most people ask me, during the boot camp that I used to host on overcoming resistance, they'd be like, but like, why is our brain like this? Like, it's been millions of years. I'm like, like the modern world has only existed for like 2 seconds in the span of human lifetimes. Like,
Yeah.
we have ancient brains in a modern world. And that's very annoying, but it also gives us information. And we didn't have this information 200 years ago. We didn't know that this is how the brain was wired. So we're very lucky that we know now. We're lucky that we have tools that we can use.
Well, I always find it so interesting, especially like this week each year, which is like Black Friday week. And, I don't know if you run into this, but often I'll meet writers that or like, want to be writers or someone trying to write a book, and they'll be like, well, I'll never be able to do it because I can't afford Scrivener. And I'm like, dude, Shakespeare wrote on like a piece of skin of an animal stretched across
Yeah.
something with like a stick and some ink, like Virginia Woolf did not have autocrit. Like you're going to be
No.
okay without these things.
That's the best thing about being a writer. Our craft is so cheap. Like we just need like
Mm,
a journal and a pencil, basically.
exactly. Well, I mean, I think about I think I like the Marquis de Sade, this book. I think he wrote this like on toilet paper in his jail cell. Right? And like 200 years later, I have it on my shelf, It's like
Yep.
it really is an amazing art form in terms of we don't need the paint, we don't need the giant expensive canvas. All we
No.
need is some form of paper and something to get some ink down on with.
Yep. Exactly. Isn't that great? Like I often am like, man, my hobby is so cheap. I love
Absolutely. It takes a lot of energy though, energy and time. I mean, I was a musician. I played in punk rock bands growing up, and I would write a song on Monday, we'd rehearse it on Wednesday, and we'd play it live at a show on Friday, and
it.
people are like,
Yeah.
"Woo," right? And it's like it doesn't work that way with writing. There isn't that like initial spark of excitement for a new creation to people cheering for you for having created it, instead of
Yeah.
being a week, it might be years, right? Very different.
Yeah, it is. I think that's one of the hardest parts actually of being a writer is the prolonged wait and there's no guarantee that it'll ever really come to anything. It's really hard. That uncertainty really stops people.
Yeah, for
I don't know
sure.
how it is for you, but I feel like it really stops a lot of people.
Well, what I find is like I've written a ton of books and none of them have landed on the New York Times bestseller list, right? And yet my life has been so enriched by being a writer.
Yeah.
You and I would not be having this conversation right now if 15 years ago I hadn't written and published a book, right? And so
Yeah.
that's what I try to encourage for the folks I'm working with is like if this sells a zillion copies and makes you rich and famous, that's probably going to be a nice thing, right? But that doesn't happen to most of us. But what does happen to most of us is our lives are enriched. We get to
Yes.
go to places. I just came back from Barbados, I was telling you. That was because I was marketing a book of mine last month. And a childhood friend saw my marketing and was like, "Hey, want to come down and hang out in my condo in Barbados?" I was like, "Sure."
I love that.
So it's
See the
like,
ripples, the
yeah,
ripples.
yeah. So you don't have to sell a million copies
No.
to get a trip to Barbados out of it, right? You
No.
just do it, and you know things happen, and there's something amazing about the unpredictability of that, you know.
Right. Also, I have to say, sometimes you don't want to be rich and famous. It's like doesn't really create
Mm,
happiness.
no kidding, no kidding. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think there's like an entire generation of like influencers who are like discovering that like living your
Yes.
life online is maybe not the healthiest way to
Not
make
the
a
healthiest
living.
way. Yeah, no, it's not. It's not a vibe for most people.
So one thing I'm sure every writing coach struggles with, and I think this is something you particularly kind of specialize in, is convincing people to get out of perfectionist mindset and not revising and polishing while still drafting, right? I
Yeah,
feel like I say this to them again and again and again, and they're like, I know, Kevin, I know, but their eyes are like, but I'm gonna get it perfect in
I
my
know.
first
Every
draft. You know,
time.
I'm gonna be the one who doesn't need revisions.
Every time. Every time. It's funny because I tell people the story when I get that glaze. I think we all get the glaze, like the glaze over in the eyes. When I tell this story, the glaze goes away. So I always tell people because I teach a lot of zero drafting. I teach my clients how to zero draft or fast draft, whatever. People call it a million things. I've heard it called shitstorming. I've heard it called all types of stuff. And I tell people if you think that having a perfect draft means that you won't have to revise or even rewrite the book, you are sorely mistaken. Because my first book that I wrote, God, over 10 years ago now, I, I wrote it thinking I was doing all the right things. I went back and revised it every time something changed. I was like, I want it to be a clean draft when I'm done so that it won't have a lot of revision needs, blah, 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 blah. I was so naive. And I think I rewrote the first 50 pages. I don't know. I don't even know how many times. I lost count. And when I finished that book, I had a developmental editor work on it with me, and I decided to rewrite the entire book from scratch based on her recommendations. Maybe I kept a few thousand words, but I rewrote the entire book from scratch, even though I had thought I was quote unquote doing it right and having a clean draft. That did not protect me from having to rewrite the entire book because
Mhm.
I was still a newbie. I was still learning my craft. I'm still learning my craft. We all are.
Yes,
But people think that it's just to protect them from the work of revision and rewriting. And I'm like, that's not how the process works.
it's iterative, right? Writing
Yep.
is iterative. There's
Yep.
no avoiding that.
Nope. No avoiding it. And I know it's not an easy pill to swallow. I know people just want to write this perfect book and then have it be sold and have it be the bestseller. That's like, it doesn't really exist. The people who it does exist for, those are outliers. And I don't really care about outliers. I don't find them interesting, you
Mm,
know?
mm. I always think of um I don't even remember the name of the book because it's so forgettable, but the book F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote after The Great Gatsby. It's like not a good book.
I have
You
not
know,
read it.
it's like the guy writes The Great Gatsby, and then the follow up, not that great. You know, if there was a formula, he would have written another Great Gatsby, and he
Right,
didn't, right? Because there's forces out of our control at play within our creative work, but also
right,
our work's relationship with the zeitgeist and society and what's going on at the
right.
time and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what that book is. I don't think I ever read it.
Yeah. I remember swimming and vacations, and
Okay.
but it wasn't that great. I think it was about his wife's mental health a little bit or something.
Okay.
But
Gotcha.
it just it was a fine book, but it wasn't the great American novel, right? But like
Right.
no one ever compares themselves to that next one. They just compare
No.
themselves to the Great Gatsby, right? And they don't
Yep.
look at the 4 books and 100 short stories he published before that, and they don't look at
Right.
what came out after that. They find
Yep.
that one little outlier, and then they say, "Oh, well, I'm garbage compared to the Great Gatsby," or
Yep.
whatever their equivalent of the Great Gatsby is, because everyone has
Yep.
that perfect book that they then compare themselves to and judge themselves against.
Yep. And it's fascinating because most of us don't see a, a messy draft in our lifetimes except for our own, or maybe our critique partners or our writing friends. And so it's hard to imagine what, quote unquote, bad writing actually looks like. We might say like, oh, this book was written so badly. But people forget that your first drafts or your messy drafts can be really messy. Like my first drafts are like not readable. Like things change halfway through, like characters disappear because I'm zero drafting. I don't let myself go back and revise until I finish the book. And so if I decide like, oh, this character doesn't work, I'll just throw them out and then they just disappear. And people will be like, what is happening, Monica? Like, and I like roast myself in my first drafts. I like leave comments and be like, I don't think dragons sweat, Monica. Like, what the hell are you writing? What are you saying? Like, I do this out of like love for myself and I
Hmm.
process. But most writers, I think when they're newbies, just expect it to come out as clean as a finished book,
Hmm.
though that they pick up at a library or a bookstore. And it's just not usually the case. It just isn't.
The metaphor I use is they think they're carving the statue out of marble, right? And it's like, dude, you don't even have the marble yet. Like, that's
Nope.
the first draft. The
That's
first
the
draft
first
is
draft.
getting the marble into your carving studio, you know?
Yep.
Like, you're already trying to, like, get the creases in your statues, corners of their eyes. It's like, you don't even have anything there yet. It's like, you
Nope.
have to get that block of marble in there to start with so that you have something to work with. I think one
Exactly.
of the challenges, and you must have to deal with this a lot, I find that there's a dissonance between the book we all have in our heads and what ends up on the page,
Yeah.
right? And as long as it's not written, it's perfect in their heads, right?
Right.
And the more they write it, and the more they make it real, and the more of a shitty first draft is there, the more they kind of have to face the reality
Yeah.
of that. How do
Right.
you work with them to get through that challenge?
It's funny because that challenge, I think, is what stops most people. That's where people give up, I think. Either that or they don't start because they're afraid of writing and it being like that, and they don't know how to face that. I don't like to call it disappointment. For them, it's probably a disappointment. I see this a lot with people who were gifted as kids. They really struggle to
Mm,
deal with things that don't look the way they want them to.
mm,
Because when you're a kid and you're being told, you know, you're amazing, all the things you do are so great, and you're so talented, and you're so skilled, and blah, 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 blah. And then you do something as you become an adult that doesn't look so good, it can feel really awful because suddenly your whole identity goes into question. It's like, oh, I guess I'm not actually good at this. Oh, if I'm not good at this, that means I shouldn't do it. And so I typically, this comes into a lot of growth mindset stuff that I do with people because I explain to them that there is no skip button to go from this part of you that you wrote this really messy draft that like it looked totally different in your head and now on paper it looks nothing like what you envisioned. There's no skip button to get from that to this perfect draft. There is only iteration and practice. And in order to get to the place where you feel happy with your draft, you have to give it practice. And that's a thing that I think a lot of people, that's where they stop. That's where people give up, honestly. And I think that's why we have so many writers who throw away drafts, half-finished drafts, or even full drafts because they're like, they think they're not up to the task. And I'm like, babe, you don't come out of the womb knowing how to write a really good book. You have to learn by doing it. You just, I'm sorry, but that's just how it goes.
I think there's a cultural myth though. Like I think the industry, I mean the opaqueness of the industry itself. It's like you can watch like James Cameron's Avatar and then watch a 4 hour documentary longer than the movie itself about the making of the movie, right? But we
Right.
never see the behind the scenes of the novel or the publishing
Yeah.
industry. And we just have this myth of the literary genius, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, oh, well, Virginia Woolf must have just been born a genius, right? And she
Right.
didn't practice, she didn't work hard at it, she didn't have multiple drafts of Mrs. Dalloway. It just magically fell out of her, right? And that's like,
Yeah.
for 100 years, that myth has been perpetuated, I think.
Right. Why do you think that is, out of curiosity?
Well, I think it's a bit of like the magician not revealing how they do their
Mm,
magic. Like
yeah.
Hemingway had a quote, um, and it was something like he was talking about readers, and he was like, fuck them if they think it's easy. Let them think it. Something like that, right? And it's kind of like this process of let's just pretend I'm this magical genius and everything just came out of me and no one else was involved and no editors
Right.
touched it and it was all great the first try. I think that, like, I think as artists, we like that romantic notion.
Yeah.
Even if it's not reality, I think it serves us well to be like, yeah, I'm a bit of a literary genius myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I see a lot of people, I have a Substack and I sometimes scroll on there. I don't post that much anymore. But is it Maggie Stiefvater? I think she wrote an article about how she's like, people just tell me I'm a literary genius. And I'm like, no, I just do the boring thing and actually do the work. I just do the work. And that's how I've written books that have become bestsellers and how I've found success is just doing the boring thing of doing the work. But that's not sexy. That doesn't,
Mm,
that
right?
kind of story, like that doesn't feel sexy to people. It's not like
No.
headline catching.
No, that's not like the apple falling on Newton's head in Eureka,
No,
right? I mean, actually, Cal Newport just came out with a book called Slow uh
low productivity, I think.
Slow Productivity. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
And in that he talked a bit about that. Like I think he talked about the exact example of Newton, where he's like Newton had been developing these theories for years, if not decades or whatever,
Yep.
right? And it had published articles on them, but it was like the Apple story captured the consciousness and he kind of
Yep.
understood that that was how he could make people understand things. But it's like
Right.
we just love that story of an apple falls on someone's head and they figure out gravity, right? When in
Yeah.
reality, he spent years,
Yep.
experimenting, thinking, studying this stuff.
I wonder why we love that story so much. Maybe it's because we think that could be us someday, that an apple will fall on our heads and
Mm.
suddenly we get this like stroke of genius. And I guess that idea is so seductive. It's like, oh, I don't have to do all this hard work to get to that place. And that's sure, maybe there's some outliers where like a stroke of genius hit them. That probably exists, but that's not the norm. It's not the norm.
I think we all want like the fairy godmother or the Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? I think we are all, so many people spend their lives just waiting for someone to go, I acknowledge your
Yep.
genius and how special you are. Here's your dress for the ball. Here's your
Yep.
lightsaber. Go on your adventure. And I think that's what we want, right? We want that moment where someone else deems us worthy and changes our lives
Mm,
forever. And in reality, change comes through slow progression over years
yep.
of dedicated hard work to like a single thing, right?
Yep. Yeah, and we don't want to have to do that hard work. We want the ease of being chosen. And I get it. Like, of course that's a sexy feeling, being like, "Oh yeah, like I didn't have to do all these years of hard work." But it also feels very hollow if you
Mm.
get it in that way. Like I have a friend, Amy, who I think how many books did she write before she got published? She'd written a few books and queried a few books and things didn't work out with one of her agents. And she finally, quote unquote, made it. And she was like, I'm really glad that I didn't make it with all those other books because my success feels so earned. And if it hadn't felt that way, it would have felt so hollow. It would have felt like it wasn't this thing that I worked hard for. And she's always thought like, yeah, writing, like and it's funny, I don't know if you've seen this with your clients. I've noticed that with the clients who have identified as writers since they were kids, find it much harder to deal with this feeling that they're not good enough as writers. Whereas people who find writing as they get older accept and understand that it's going to take them a lot of work to get good as writers. Have you noticed that with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the ones who have called themselves writers since kids, it's an integral part of their vision of themselves. And so
Yeah,
then when it doesn't succeed at the levels that they want or as quick as they want, it's not that there's something wrong with what they're doing, it's there's something wrong with them. Like, I guess
exactly.
I'm not really a writer, or worse, I'm not who I thought I was.
Exactly. Yeah, and this friend was studied to be a doctor. She's a doctor, and she was like, "Oh, I decided to write books in my spare time." I just she's one of those people that I'm like, "How are you?" Like she plays piano, she learns languages, she's a doctor. I just can't. And she was like, "Yeah, it's just going to take me hard work to write books and publish them." I like, and she just understands that because she didn't start writing until she was in her 20s, like late 20s. And it's really cool to see people find that when they're older and to respect the fact that it's going to take them work and it's going to take
Mhm.
them that time and practice and iteration, you know?
Yeah.
Because so many people don't realize that that's what it takes.
Did you ever watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
I don't think I did.
There was one little mini flashback where the main character Jake, it cut back to like 1998, and he was like dressed up all in ska outfit, and he was like, "Ska forever, ska is my life," you know. And I think most, like, by the time people start to get older, they start to realize, oh, like the thing I'm into right now doesn't necessarily define me for all time. And
Right.
so these people who come to writing later in life, I think they acknowledge it's something they're adding to their life. They're
Mhm.
enriching their lives by adding something, as opposed to thinking it's something within them that defines them. And then
Yeah, I
it
love
gets
that.
all mixed up in their kind of psychology of who they are, as opposed to just
Yeah,
saying, hey, I'm taking up writing. It's something I've always wanted to do, and now I'm retired or whatever, and I finally have the opportunity to do it.
right. I love that.
Well, speaking about writers not needing to do it all alone and getting support along the way, you have a cool new program about matching up writers. Can you tell us a
Yeah.
bit about that?
Yeah. So I had this idea for years and I was very nervous about trying it because it was logistically very difficult to do, but I do it after many months of building it. Basically, it's a writing buddy or critique partner matching program. So you can either do writing buddy, which means you're getting a writing friend match who you don't have the expectation of swapping pages with. Since a lot of writers who are newbies don't really want to swap pages yet or get critique, they still want to write very privately. Or you can do the critique partner side, which is where you would be swapping pages with your match. So I created this kind of out of the need to connect people because what I have found in the last, I don't know how long I've been in this industry, I can't remember, but out of all these years in the industry, when I watch people's careers and their success, what I have found is that the people who are able to keep going and have resilience to deal with the hard times, which all writers will deal with that. Every writer will deal with it. 100% are the people who have community.
Hmm.
And not just like, their spouse is supportive, but people who have community with other writers specifically. Because I think just like we don't understand what it's like to be an actor or like something that we've never done before. We don't understand necessarily the pros and cons of that, like the real struggles of that. Non-writers don't understand the struggles of writing. And you really need people who do get it so that not only do you have somebody to go to when it's hard, but also that you have people you can connect with while you're building your writing life. So many people think that they shouldn't get community with other writers until they've like made it. They're like, "Oh, I'll get a writing community or a writing friend once I publish a book or once I'm legitimate, whatever that might mean. And I'm like, no, actually, community helps you publish books and helps you make it. Like having that community and having support from others is what helps you actually become successful. Because you have people to lean on. It's as simple as that. It's boring. Again, it's like that boring thing of like, we know what helps us, but it's hard to do. Having connection is, in my opinion, the missing link, the shortcut between writers who start out and then they give up to actual writers who don't give up and actually publish work.
Yeah, I mean, we could look at the 20th century from the modernists, where you have Fitzgerald and Hemingway, these people we were talking about in Ezra Pound's plays in Paris, kind of figuring out modernist literature. Virginia Woolf was friends with E.M.
Mm,
Forster. Go forward in time, you've got C.S. Lewis and
yep,
Tolkien and the Inklings all getting together. Forward another decade, you've got the Beat poets and Kerouac and Ginsberg and Burroughs and all these guys hanging out.
yep,
Um, Throughout history, like artistic movements are always the result of artists coming together in
yep.
community, like, and not just to support each other, but to like um challenge each other, right? To say you
Yeah,
could do better, you could do better, and push each other in a way that, like cheerlead each other, like not push, but cheerlead each other in a way that we might not do if we're on our own.
right. And maybe your partner, even if your spouse is supportive, they don't know how to cheerlead you in the way that another writer would.
No, no. I call it the
No.
trenches. It's like if you're not in those World War I trenches of writing a book, you do not get it, right? You
Nope.
need those other people in there in the mud up to their knees, and
Yep.
all of that, because yeah, they just don't get it otherwise.
No, they don't.
Well, where can people find out about that program, and where can they find out more about you?
Yeah. So my website is very simple. It's monicahay.com, MonicaHay. And that's where all the information will be located. I open the Writing Buddy CP matching every couple months. I'll probably open it, I don't know, sometime in 2026, hopefully. I'm not one of those entrepreneurs that like has my life scheduled and together. I don't know how people do that, but that is not me.
I know
Uh,
every minute of every day until Friday. That's it. I just want to survive until Friday, and then it all starts over again. When people are like, in quarter 3, I'm going to be
I
doing
know.
this. I'm just like, my God, week 3 of a month is like too far away to think
I know.
of.
I don't know how they do it. Like I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm eating for dinner tonight.
Mm,
Like,
mm.
how am I supposed to know what's
Right.
happening in Q4?
It's like when the dentist is like, "Are you good for an appointment at 10 in the morning 8 months from now?" You're like, "I probably, I don't know."
Probably, hopefully. Yeah, it cracks me up. But yeah, you can find me at monicahay.com and you can join there, my writing buddy program. It's funny because people are like, how do you match people? Through massive surveys. The writing buddy survey is over 60 questions. The critique partner is over 70. So it's a very thorough process.
Well, and that brings us full circle, because one of the first things we talked about was how you diagnostic, how you figure out what's going on. Let's talk simple words for Kevin. How you figure out what's going on with your clients. You said I ask a lot of questions, right? So I
Yep.
suspect your experience digging into people's personalities via coaching probably transferred over lovely to these
Yep.
in-depth surveys you've created for the matching program.
Yep. I basically just call myself nosy. I'm just really nosy.
No, I mean, sometimes people will say, "Oh, Kevin, you're a great interviewer," and I'm like, "I'm just curious." It's not
I'm just
necessarily
curious.
great. Like, if you're genuinely interested in people and what they have to say, it's not that tough to interview them, because you're just like, "Tell me more. That's
Tell me more.
interesting."
I'm curious. Yep.
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
great. Wait, so did you give a URL? Did we tell
Yeah,
people about that?
monicahay.com. That's where
Okay,
all my links are located.
yes, and there was a giveaway that we were going to
Oh
mention,
yeah.
right? That folks can go grab.
Yes. If you want to get a guide, a free guide on creating focus and presence in your writing life, which if you're an ADHDer, you probably do. Or I mean most people do, especially in the modern age with phones. You can also find that link on monicahay.com. It'll be under my link tree. You can find that along with a bunch of other freebies.
Yeah, basically, if you own a smartphone, you need this tool. So Go check it out. All right, Monica, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's been such a delight chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. This was great.